Greetings, YouTube. Recently I did a video about how to insult an orc. And someone commented that in their campaign, orcs are carnivorous. So the greatest insult you can make to an orc is call them like a grass eater or something like that. Which got me thinking about carnivorous races in general. Now, in the real world, large predators roughly in the same weight range as a human, in game terms, medium or large, for, D&D or Pathfinder, they are periodic eaters. They don't eat every single day for the most part. They'll eat a large meal, and for the next day or two, maybe even 3 depending on the environment, they're not going to do much. They lounge around. They goof off. It's what they do. The big cats, wolves, Komodo dragons, things like that. Bears are omnivores. They do hunt, they don't hunt as much as the other full-blown carnivores do. Bears, in fact, have a diet very similar to humans. Maybe it's one of the reasons I feel a connection to them. That, other than my head, I'm very fuzzy. But these large carnivores aren't doing anything besides being large carnivores. They're born with everything they need technically to live. Whereas a carnivorous race needs technology to survive for the most part. Unless they're, in the 2 to 3 intelligence range when they're just glorified animals. And that technology means a constant supply of energy to keep functioning. Which is going to mean they're going to need more meat than a carnivorous animal in the wild. Because they're going to be constantly needing to do things like on the move, construction, the manufacture of arms and weapons, social interactions at a level that carnivores aren't going to need in real life. Which got me thinking about the logistics of how to keep a group of carnivorous humanoids alive. And they're somewhat substantial. Now, you can herd, of course. In fact, I believe that the person that made the comment about carnivorous orcs mentioned that. But in the real world, you herd animals for meat, but you only bring them to market once a year. So you can't be eating them on a constant basis and have them survive. You need to have breed stock and such, which means it's going to be a supplement to your diet, but it can't be your full diet. Because if you have enough herds to give you all the food you need, how the heck are you going to find enough food for the herds? So there's a point where it's diminishing gains. Yes, you have lots of meat, but now you've depleted the environment to the point where you have to move everywhere, and now you're in constant conflict, not just the level of conflict traditionally seen in orcs. So after some thinking, I decided that carnivorous orcs, or carnivorous humanoids in general, could work, but they're going to need to be small quantities. You're going to be talking like wolf pack quantities. Small units that move regularly or have an unusually rich environment. And I think that in standard D&D, that's reflected in like ogres and hill giants, for example. They're traditionally seen as carnivores, or mostly carnivores, with the penchants for alcohol. And they're always in small numbers. You don't see huge armies of ogres and hill giants. They're always small quantities. And that's a good reflection, I think, of how you would have to have a carnivorous humanoid race in a game. You couldn't have huge armies. You couldn't see armies like you do in Lord of the Rings if all of them are carnivores. It just won't work. You can't feed them. There isn't enough meat in the world, even if they're eating the dead that they kill. And they're going to have to eat their own dead. You've got no choice. Now, the society that builds up around this, they may have some cultural and societal dictates that say, well, we consume our dead, to preserve their memories and eat their essence, which is fine. It's a nice justification for the fact that you have to eat your dead to survive. As an offshoot of that, they could very well preserve the bones and say, cast them into like terracotta figures, like the Chinese had. Well, the Chinese didn't put people inside them, but they had terracotta figures. Now just imagine terracotta orcs with bones inside them. Might make an interesting form of undead. I just can't work out how you would have huge armies. At least not on a regular basis. So maybe every once in a while the orcs get to the point where there's lots of them and they go into essentially a feeding frenzy, which then has them rolling in towards civilization, not just because they're aggressive in general or because they have a kind of a Klingon warrior race, which they could very well have. I've always kind of liked orcs as Klingons. But because it's gotten to the point where if they don't go out and find a new source of meat, they're all going to crash. But they're going to crash anyway, because they're going to go into conflict, and then they're going to end up being wiped out. Because inevitably, these situations almost always end up with those races getting their buns kicked. Because when they start becoming aggressive, they bring in military patrols, full-fledged armies, or worst of all, adventurers. Because nothing's worse for a humanoid race that gets aggressive than encountering adventurers. They will do you in every time. So, I find the idea of carnivorous humanoid races a little problematic. On small quantities, as I said, like the ogres and the hill giants, I think that they make perfect sense, and you can hand-wavium some of the details about how they survive. But when it comes to really large numbers, for me, that's my breaking point. That's the point where I can't just hand-wave it away. I'm like, well, how do you logistically feed this culture? And you can't. This species can't exist in my mind simply because there isn't enough meat in the world to keep them going. Which is why I prefer my orcs to be omnivores like all the other humanoids. That's just, you know, yes, they may be big meat eaters. Say, like, you know, lots of cultures have large portions of meat in their diet. Norwegians, Mongolians, you know, any number of other races are known for eating large quantities of fish and meat. But they're not carnivores. They are still omnivores, even if the percentage of vegetables in their diet is small. You can ask my friends Skull and Kara about that. So I want to hear what people have to say about, do you have large quantities of carnivorous humanoids in your game? And if you don't have large quantities, do you have small quantities? Do you have races that are carnivorous, but are still in the intelligent range? They're still fully sapient beings. And remember, there is a difference between sentient and sapient. A sentient being, my cat is sentient. My cat is aware of the world around them. If I throw something, the cat sees it and the cat reacts. If I poke the cat reacts. That's a sentient being. A sapient being, however, is aware of themselves. When they look into that mirror, or in this case, that camera, they're looking at themselves and they know they're looking at themselves. That's sapient. So if you have fully sapient carnivorous races in your game, how do you run them? What do you do with them? Is there some mechanism that you found that works for you that lets you have them in large quantities, or do you not care that logistically it would be difficult, if near impossible, to have a large quantity of carnivorous races in the world? I want to know.